we're going to discuss Intro to Open RAN Security. So one of my main courses now in Asia Open RAN Academy. And basically, with Open RAN Security, with the push for Open RAN, it was designed with security in mind. So other vendors actually are claiming they are secure by design when doing Open RAN because we all know that telecommunication is a critical infrastructure. While it's still in the early stages as compared to other legacy networks, we need to understand its current state and direction. Discussions, including risk assessments, threat modeling challenges that would affect various open RAN components and interfaces, security. Also be discussing here the NIST cybersecurity frameworks, CIS critical security controls, among others, with these frameworks that were tapped by Open RAN to help assess and implement controls to further secure Open RAN deployment. So Open RAN security, what does open mean? For Open RAN, it's actually the open part here is interoperability standard for radio access network elements. And open refers to intentional capability of the software, hardware, and interfaces to comply with an agreed upon standard. So this system would include open source software, open source hardware, and open interfaces. But do note, by definition, Open RAN is not necessarily open source. There are some factors that would relate Open RAN to only open source yung gagamitin, but it's not actually the case. It's open interfaces, yun yung main goal for Open RAN. So you could mix and match various components and it would work as intended. That said, while Oran Alliance is stating here it's not necessarily open source, I would presume with all the things that I've seen also in Open RAN implementation and research and development, a huge component of Open RAN would be running in open source. Okay. So current state of Open RAN security, now we have the most mature one, the threat modeling and remediation analysis. There's also requirement specification. It's already mature, but there are still some work in progress on that aspect. Protocol specification with focus on TLS, DTLS, SSH, and IPsec. One thing to note here is they didn't really invented anything new. They were reusing industry standard security protocols to transmit data within the Open RAN environment. There's also the test specification. This is in progress, but we do have a good end-to-end specification testing document from Open RAN. Now, current state and security challenges for various RAN components, a lot of it are already available, especially for the interfaces available today. It's already defined. Most of those defined was actually stemmed from the 3GPP standards. For others that were in development a few years back, like the interface, auto interface, apps, OSC software, it's I think it's already mature at this point in time, but it's still there are still some tweaks being done on those, and it's not fully ratified. And then for the security of physical assets, you still subscribe to existing best practices, and this would be operator responsibility, because of course radio access network would have the physical components, especially for the towers and some of the edge computing, cloud computing on-prem would fall under physical assets. Again, based on the current state, it's going to be mainly on the responsibility of the operator. That said, a lot of the internal components or major components of Open RAN, there is a push for cloud first. They want a large segment of what used to be on-prem for telcos now would have to be operating on the cloud. So most of this are designed with cloud in mind. That said, well, of course, you cannot cloudify yet radio and antennas, so that would have to be something physical. But there is some sort of telco sharing, depends on the frequencies and antennas that could be done on towers. So yeah, Open RAN deployments are less secure than traditional single vendor approach. So this is a common issue that is being raised now with Open RAN, because in the previous generation of radio access network, you have one vendor that would deal end to end. And of course, there is a notion that if you deal with a single vendor, it's a bit simpler. You have to talk to just one vendor. They have supposedly, tested this solution end to end. And if there's any issue, you would just have to talk to a single vendor. No? But with Open RAN, no, where you could mix and well, you could still do single vendor approach, no, if needed. No? But the goal here is to get the best of the module, no, on whoever's providing it and whatever your need is and whatever cost na you could afford. No? You should be able to deploy specific components of Open RAN, and even though they are from multiple vendors, you should be able to operate a radio access network because of interoperability. But on the downside now, it's you have to talk to multiple vendors. No? Hence, there is a notion here that there are system integrators that would act, no, as a single point of contact, and they'll be the one to relay and cascade the issues or features requested, no, to various vendors, making it seem to be like the legacy deployments, no, of radio access networks. The problem, of course, is, well, there would be some latency in cascading, no, for these issues and features. With these two, ORAN Alliance Security Task Group, no, engages ORAN Alliance working groups to tackle security challenges on all ORAN interface and address it, no, as needed. So for this, we have, at least on the course, no, we have reading. It's an intro here, no, Open RAN Security in 5G. It's just a 4-page, no, a half hour estimated reading na for us to understand what's the basic of ORAN security based on openranpolicy.org. So understand. There's also the report on the cybersecurity of Open RAN, no? That from the NIS Cooperation Group. This one is 31 pages, no? Roughly 1 to 2 hours, no, of reading. And at least for the course, will be requiring the students just a one-page understanding of the key highlights and takeaway for this documentation. So from Ericsson, they have itemized, no, on what they think ORAN security risks are. And one thing that they know that is number one on there is with Open RAN, no, you need to protect expanded threat surface. Expanded because, again, now you are talking to multiple vendors with multiple products in the radio access network, where in the previous deployments, it's just one, and they would have to be the one responsible for it. But yeah, with multiple vendors or multiple entities that would be in the radio access network now, you have various products that might not have been tested, no, as stringent as everyone else. So this is one of their main concerns. They want to protect the threat, expanded threat surface. Next is they want to close security vulnerabilities associated with the near real-time internet, near real-time RIC. No, this basically would be a critical heart, basically, of Open RAN. No, so any vulnerabilities within the near real-time RIC, has to be addressed and closed, appropriately. We also want to address the threat to trust chain introduced by decoupling of functions. And so, as mentioned, you are operating now a radio access network with multiple vendors, no, and modules supplied from multiple vendors. They are concerned, no, that some of these components might not be that secure. I mean, they are interoperable, they have been tested, okay, but you could only test so much. No, depends on how the organization would develop certain products and components. And they want to address this in conjunction with the expanded threat surface. They also want to have a practice, no, of a higher level of due diligence for exposure to public exploits from use of open source code. Because well, in the previous generation of radio access networks, no, they are implemented with a single vendor. They are using their own proprietary code. Now they would be, to ease up the product development, no, there would be a heavy use of open source. And what they're citing here is, at least from Ericsson's point of view, no, from proprietary mindset, it's all of these source codes that is publicly available, no, or open source, no, might have some vulnerabilities that wouldn't have been addressed immediately. While they do have some points, no, we got various large-scale open source vulnerabilities from the past. No, we got the shell shock, we got bad block from SMB vulnerabilities, we got What's the latest one? The XV vulnerability, no, from and that was backdoor, no, from that library that's used for OpenSSH and other components, no, has been backdoored. No? Luckily, it was discovered by a Microsoft engineer. I'm not sure if luckily or um, if you read on the XVA vulnerability or backdoor, so to speak, no, it was detected by a Microsoft engineer because he noticed that there is a sub-second delay, no, from his SSH session, no, and that's when he started digging out and found that there was a new module in the XV library that turns out to be backdoored. No? But I'm not sure how lucky we are. No? Everyone else, no, would have that kind of engineer noticing. No? Again, have a sub-second delay on SSH led to the exposure of the backdoor in XV. No? Now, that said, that's also open source, no? Which helped out a bit, no, to figure out what went wrong and what was the backdoor injected. No? We don't have that kind of visibility on proprietary source code. We would leave it up to the vendor to claim that their system and how they made it and their source code is secure. Which, as we all know, also, there have been various, no, big critical vulnerabilities from proprietary vendors, no? That of course, the likes of big companies like Microsoft and Apple, no, they would have released, no, various patches on their software because of vulnerabilities that were discovered. And by experience, no, looking for vulnerabilities in open source as compared to proprietary, it's easier to find vulnerabilities in open source, but you are now falling into the trap where you have the mindset that since it's open source, a lot of more people could see, no, vulnerabilities. No, but that's not always the case. No, we've seen vulnerabilities in open source that has been there for 20 years, roughly, no, that were not discovered until recently. So that means the system was exposed for the past 20 years, just either no one found it or someone found it and it was actively exploiting it and it's not telling anyone about that issue. Then, of course, we want this for Ericsson. They want implementation of defenses from physical attacks, which is a given for radio access networks. Okay. Now, for the threat modeling, they clustered this, no, into asset threats, stakeholders, and attackers. That would be the main components here. So for assets, the threat model that I'm describing to for Open RAN, they have 30 data and interface assets, 12 component assets. For threats, they identified, no, threats against ORAN, threats against OCloud, threats against open source software, physical, against radio networks. And since AI and machine learning is a huge component of Open RAN, no? It's also considered a threats against machine learning or what we call adversarial machine learning. Because if the training set, no, introduced has some anomalies, no, or was intentionally given that, no, it could be manipulated in a way that it wasn't designed to do. For stakeholders, they have four, no? Mobile network operators, technology providers, administrators, integrators, and testers. And then for attackers, they have identified five, no? Cyber criminals that has something to gain, no? Most likely monetary, no? or influence. You got cyber terrorists or those that would want just to cause damage, no? Across another entity. No? There is also hacktivists where they are advocating against something, no? That using the telecoms, no? As a platform for it. You got nation states, no? Or advanced persistent threats that is attacking your environment because, well, you're not a friendly nation to them, or they have some interest in your uh, territory. And lastly, they are also considering cyber threat, in which case, this is actually one of the most dangerous threat, no? The one that's part of your team that's operating inside the radio access network. They also are indicating security measures. So inside the threat modeling documentation, inside requirement specification documents, and inside protocol specification documents. And overall, no, when they mix and match this various components of the threat modeling, no, they are putting out no, risk assessment with severity rating of low, medium, and high. So this is an example graph. No? I got this from Security Gen. No? I got the YouTube link here, which explains this a lot better. No? But what they want to do, at least on this diagram, no, is they wanted to map no, the assets and the threats. Okay? And on the third box, no, they have this threat to asset mapping, no, where they would be figuring out no, which of these threats, no, threat definition, um, would be affecting no, to which data assets. So we'll have that list here. And ultimately, once we have at least on their end, they already have done it. They have identified not only the CIA in security. So for those who have done or listened to security talks in the past, no, there's what we call CIA or confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But this time they also are advocating privacy no? And exposure no? For this protection goals. Um, so once they have mapped this, they would check the risk level depending on the privacy impact of that on the threat of privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and number of affected ODUs or ORUs, and then the impact on synchronization. So, and they would put out a level of that no, for us to figure out are we affected, are we covered, do we have sufficient controls no, to protect us against those types of exposure. So here we have BSI no, from Germany uh, who have done risk analysis no, based on the victims or targets no, here in ORAN. So they have identified end user, the state or society, and then the telecom operator as possible targets. They also did no attack perspective no what's gonna happen if the end user was attacked, the attacker was coming from the outside, or we have an insider, or the RAN service provider was being attacked, or the cloud service provider is being attacked. Then on the assets, they have grouped it into four, no? The OCloud, the interfaces, and the apps, and lastly, the machine learning. And then for the targets, we have confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, no, and privacy. So again, for the most part, the base security components here on the targets would be the CIA, no? The authenticity and privacy has been a recent addition to uh, augment no, the CIA because it's we have realized no, that privacy and authenticity, while to a degree, no, you could map it to uh, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but it's not a full definition that you could bank on. So, hence they extended the CIA to include authenticity and privacy. So we also have, at least based on BSI's ORAN risk analysis, no, security measures no, from 3GPP, since still no, a large component of Open RAN is going to interface with 3GPP based module. You got security measures from ORAN, and then same no, risk assessment as with the previous one, low, medium, and high. No? So this approach measures the risk for a victim type. No? When an attacker aims at a certain target, of which an asset that is or is not protected by security controls. And the beauty of the analysis of BSI, no? So I have here an example of just one out of the many um, aspects, no, that was analyzed by BSI. No? Like for this one, they were thinking that, okay, from the perspective of the stakeholder, which is end user, state, and network operator, no? And you have an attacker. Uh, if it's coming from the outside, if it's coming from the user side, and if it's coming from the insider. The green one would indicate that they have a low risk rating or they have controls. No? The red one, of course, would be danger. No? And if you could let's take a quick look, no, here. If the attack is gonna come from outsider or user, no, they have some protections. It's not full. The best would be all green, no? But of course that's gonna be a very hard thing and very expensive, no, to protect everything. So this risk assessment would um, visualize to any stakeholders, no? If the risk exposure is great and if they could if their risk appetite would allow it. And if you take a look at this table, no, if it's actually an insider, it's a very high risk, no, very low controls for an insider attacking the end user, the state, or the network operator. So, um, yeah, for this, no, a lot of the controls here would be discussed later, like defense in depth, principles of this privilege, yeah, checking, background checking of the operators' employees, no, especially those with running critical systems. And we've seen that in organizations and any organization for that matter. No? So you ask for clearances on PNP, NBI, you issue drug tests, no, and sometimes you even issue lifestyle checks, no, to figure out if the user is actually living more than what's um, based on his salary, no, or income, no, and that would be an indicator that something's wrong, no. So yes, but that means if you could see the insider, no, it only a bit had some basic controls from the network operator side, no, but attacking the end user and state, it's a bit weak, no? Hence the high risk rating of red for end user and state, no? If the insider is going to be attacking. Okay. Now, this is a huge document actually, very technical, no? And it's around 79 pages, but it's a very good read, no? If you want to understand more for the own run risk analysis based on BSI, German regulator. No? So this is 79 pages. Actually, I would say since a bit technical, no? Around 5 hours for some understanding of what's happening here. Okay. Next, we identify top risk, no? Across multiple aspects of ORAN. So for the service management and orchestration, okay, it's critical that network information data is kept private and protected. No? So any leakage of this one is a security risk, and that includes configurations. Of course, you don't want your configurations to be out there. No? The topology, the network KPIs, and the OCloud KPIs, because this could indicate, no, what kind of setup you have, what's the extensiveness of your coverage. So typically this is kept, no, within the organization, or the operator, and it's not for public consumption. Um, Another top risk for SMOs is denial of service and degradation of and control. No? So ORAN function descriptors tampering, no, if you could at a threat actor would be able to do that, it could affect, no, yung service, could cause denial, degradation, and control issues. Configuration tampering would also be a factor here, no, if they could have access to those uh, configuration files. Attacks from the management and the service management accreditation network, no, to OCloud, because they're already in the SMO, no, they might have a chance to jump into the OCloud part of Open RAN. There's also attack from SNO to various ORAN functions since they're already in the SMO site. So SMO security controls, you got data storage protection. No? So you want to encrypt sensitive data. Okay? And this is a common protection now against various threats, no? Where you encrypt data at rest and also encrypt data in transit. Hence, um, Open RAN did not even have to reinvent that. No? There are already various protocols that has been used in the past that has been known to be robust, that they are adopting and implementing within the overall environment. They also want to restrict per function access to data buckets, compartmentalizing them. Access control, they are advocating strong password policies, like logins must require multi-factor authentication. So gone are the days that username and password would be the only control, no, to for someone to gain access dun sa isang environment. Now OpenRAN says that, well, you need to have MFA. It's just not a username and a password. Because we all know how easy it is for a threat actor to gain username and password. No? They would just send you an email pretending to be a login screen. Once you log in, then they would have your credentials. No? Ideally, MFA would protect you against an account takeover. No? But we've also seen that depends on the type of MFA that you use. No, it's OTP or push notification based. No? Um, y- there is still a chance that an individual might be victimized, no, for an account takeover with that. No, so far, while they are still advocating MFA, I mean, anything with MFA is still a leaps and bounds better, no, than just a username and a password for authentication. But it could still be harvested. It could still be grabbed, no, by the threat actor and used against the organization. But there could be other controls, no, like for access control, no, let's say you have a terminal access to a certain equipment or network, no, you could whitelist, no, it's also part of the MFA. Na you could only log in even if you have username, password, and token. You could only log in if you are in the corporate network, or if you have logged in into the VPN. So that would minimize the exposure. Another is we use hardware token, like UB keys, where you eliminated, no, the decision point of a human to determine if the site is phishing or not. Because with the use of U2F, no, universal two-factor, like YubiKeys technology, the domain is part of the challenge and response of the multi-factor. So if it's a lookalike domain, and the user did not notice that, the challenges response will not work in the first place. So even if the user was able to give up the username and the password, the multi-factor authentication will not work if it's U2F based, no, yung mga YubiKeys. They practically solve the problem of OTP and push notification based MFA, where again you leave it to the user to decide, is the site phishing or not. If the user decided that I already entered my username and password, no, because I believe the initial message, no, there's a strong chance that the OTP will also be inputted by the users. No? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those sad stories online, no, where an individual was life savings, no, was harvested out of their banks, no, because they mistakenly gave out the OTP or put it on a phishing site. All their balance were harvested out. So again, there's still a lot of discussion here, but of course, not all systems that has MFA would support the YubiKey type of authentication. No? But they are OpenRAN is advocating that any authentication system must support, MFA. Okay? We also want least privilege, which we'll discuss in a bit, and then role-based access control, no? For basically limiting, no, what you can do based on the roles and accounts that you've been using, and privileges assigned to those accounts. They also realize, no, for SMO, no, software and artifacts life cycle controls, no, because they want control on supply chain, version control, safe continuous integration, continuous deployment practices, and anti-tampering techniques of digital signatures. No? So these are attacks that we've observed, no, for the past few years that was initially in theory, no, but there were other threat actors that has been successful in pulling this off. No, so like supply chain, no, we got stories here where servers, no, were injected with chips that weren't supposed to be there. Maybe a safe continuous integration, continuous deployment practices. We got software companies now that has been penetrated by threat actors and inserted, no, various backdoors on those systems. No? So I think one of this case studies here would be SolarWinds. No, they were compromised. The threat actor was injecting, no, backdoors on their system. And then when they compile this and submitted these updates across their clients, so of course their client's gonna be running a backdoor version of their software. And there's also an advocate of digital signatures, no, for I would think this has something to do with softwares and firmwares, no, being applied in Open Run, meaning if someone is attempting to update, no, a device, a module, a firmware, the system should be able to validate that that software came from the actual vendor via digital signatures. No? It's not someone claiming to be from vendor A and giving you a download link na you apply this and it's gonna patch your system, no? The digital signatures would be a protection mechanism, no? Where if the signature does not match on what it knows it's supposed to be, no, it's not gonna apply the patch, no? Meaning there was tampering involved with the software that wants to be applied sana on the modules, no? So it's not gonna accept it. Okay? ORAN does not want, cannot replicate, no? So fixation list, no? ORAN does not want and cannot replicate the work done by other SDOs, no, regarding orchestrations. So ORAN, they want, ORAN mentions, no, yung um, ETSI, no? So this is the European Telecommunication Standards Institute Network Function Virtualization na framework for or the ONAP, no, yung Open Network Automation Protocol framework for radio access network orchestration and slicing. So they adopted this. Attacks related to orchestration can be as sophisticated as to manipulate the service logic, no, or aim at the service degradation and denial. So again, there are different types of attacks that maybe signal downgrade, no, or um, just loading the system, no, para hindi sila makapag-service tas and ended, no, whatever estimated users on a specific area, no. So it could be as simple as that, no, not necessarily cause a full outage, no, and it's gonna be hard actually to troubleshoot, no. Hence they are recommending, no, the use of uh, a similar framework, no, to be adopted in ORAN. So for OCloud, there are various implementations na, and you can follow several models, no. Of course, we have the private cloud, the hyperscaler edge cloud, or public cloud, no. There's also the hybrid models, no, which combines public and private cloud, no, even with sticking to ETSI NFV foundations, no. So computing infrastructure here, the cloud, no, you got the host OS and containers secure deployment. So this would be uh, a lot. Expect a lot of usage of containerization in ORAN. And with containerization, and cloud computing, of course, they're banking on secure isolation, no, using virtualization platforms. There's also identity and access management for user and application level and resource identification and authorization. Most of this would have to be managed by the IAM, the system. For data, mentioned this a while ago, the data at rest and in transit must be protected, especially when going to the OCloud, no, which for the most part is going to be outside the physical control of the organization. So encryption in data at rest and in transit would be mandatory. Networking controls, no, separation of network segments and slices is recommended by ORAN. This has have the notion na if we could do microsegmentation on network deployment and not fall into the trap of what we've been doing now. No, now we have separations on our network now, hopefully, no, where you have your workstations, the private network, you have your DMZs, no, and then you have your publicly exposed network components, no. But what I am usually encountering is, let's say on the DMZ, no, you have various servers on the DMZ. It's not actually related to each other. They just have this label of this has to be on the DMZ because of our definition of the usage and connectivity of the server. They have to be in the DMZ. But why would you allow uh, maybe 5 different systems, no, that's not actually related to each other, or maybe minorly related to each other, to be on the same flat network? No? So ideally, you separate them. You'll have multiple DMZs, no? And you have controls to segment them. If DMZ A would want to talk to DMZ B, then we could open up the firewall, but it has to be very specific, no? To again, the objective here is to contain the damage in case something goes wrong. One machine gets compromised in the DMZ A, it's gonna be a hard you're gonna give that threat actor a hard time jumping to DMZ B, C, D, and so on and so forth. And hopefully, you have monitoring in place, no, that could detect an anomaly on DMZA and yank them out of the network, minimizing their dwell time, no, in the environment. Okay? At least that's the hope. And to a degree, no, that's sort of active protection too. Now, for the software lifecycle, no, we want um, security from the operating system side and the network functions, starting from boot and during the DevOps cycle. Of course, for the boot, this goes hand in hand with digital signatures. Like for booting operating systems right now, you have UEFI that could validate signatures, no, if the OS is not tampered, no, before booting up, because there are cases where um, they could modify the boot logic, basically superseding the operating system, and they could basically control, no, what the OS would be doing. And that was because no, OS wasn't validated before, no, during boot up. But with the UEFI and other techs, no, this has been, I would say, a thing of the past, no, but there is control against these types of attack. And of course, we want visibility, no, through awareness and countermeasures. So event logging and analysis, all these components are generating logs. Uh, you need to turn it on, and these logs should be shipped out, no, of those boxes and modules, no, to be sent to a log aggregator, or what we call in security a SIM environment, no, where they aggregate all the logs, and you could have basically a single system, no, to do your analysis with. No, it's not like if you don't have those types of log aggregators or SIM. No, if you see an anomaly on module A, no, something coming from module B, no, now you have to log into module B, check the logs on module B, and then figure out what's happening there. But with the SIM and log aggregators, so it's all these logs going to be sent and centralized to a single platform that is very well designed, no, for visibility and enrichment of these logs that is being passed, no, with correlation capabilities too. And some would even claim machine learning and AI, no, for log analysis. Then that would simplify, no, the monitoring and awareness part of uh, the cloud environment. And so this, of course, would translate to inspection of data. So we're going to be better at detecting anomaly and protecting the environment. Okay. So here we have ORAN Security Focus Group, no, with a documentation, no, of security in cloud, and they have version 2.0 of this document on this link. This is a bit technical read too, no? It's 95 pages, and that would give out roughly 5 hours of time, no, to read and understand this documentation. So better with coffee. Next, we have ORAN interfaces. This one is O1. So here we have itemization, no, of interfaces, and we'll discuss briefly, no, yung scope of the interface, the security controls, and the risk. No? So let's say for the O1 interface, the scope of this interface is for provisioning, uh, fault supervision, performance monitoring, no, file management, heartbeat, and others. No? If you take a look at yung security controls for the O1 interface, nothing's really new here. No? You got SSH for logins, or TLS, no, for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You got the network configuration access control model, no, with least privilege access control. You got directory access via LDAP and OAuth 2.0. So those are nothing specific to Open RAN. No? We've been using that across various systems. No? And what ORAN determined was we've been using it for quite some time, decades even. So if it's good enough for internet banking, no, most likely it's good enough for ORAN. No? But and they don't have to reinvent anything. No? And this has been heavily vetted and tested over the years, and it has known to be robust. No? So they adopted this protocols for implementation of protection in the O1 interface. And they have identified the risk, no? Like denial of service from provisioning, leaks of sensitive fault and performance data, degradation of runtime controller functions, and they have determined that any attack for the O1 interface would require medium complexity, meaning this interface is not easily accessible for any threat actor. So they have to be somewhere in the network already. Hence, the complexity of the attack. They tag this as medium. They want if someone wants to attack the O1 interface. Now for the O2, it's somehow similar to O1, but you have this. You know, this oops, you have this a bit change in scope. No? So now you have you have scope involving inventory, monitoring of fault and performance also done by O1 interface. No? But this has something to do now a lot more with software management and lifecycle management. No? But if you take a look at the control, no, they still have a TLS, no, and the likes for security controls. Risk heavily, you'll see a pattern, no, that denial of service from attacks to the infrastructure is a common risk that they have identified because, well, for a telecom system, you need a good uptime. And I won't say it's basic now, but there are a lot of attacks that could cause outage in a telecom network. So they want to be protected or at least resilient against this denial of service attack. No? And even if they cannot cause outage, no, they could cause a degradation of functions, no, which could lead to some sort of data or telemetry manipulation. So rigs and apps, you got here again service denial, no, or degradation against user equipments or wholesales. No, you can alter policies on the non-real-time rig, altered enrichment information for non-real-time rig, machine learning, no? Data poisoning. No? So this one would need some how do you call this uh, a new way, no, to attack because this is not a common way to attack a network na yung machine learning data poisoning, no? But there would be I would say let's say an example that we've seen, no, well, not really a machine learning data poisoning, more of injecting malicious telemetry data to a system, no, causing it to think otherwise, no? So not sure if you remember an article maybe almost a decade back, no, um, where this guy wanted to determine, no, if it could influence waste traffic telemetry. So what they did was they put a lot of cell phones, turn on Waze on a cart, no, and started pulling that cart in a road. And of course, with a lot of devices, no, telling Waze that yeah, we are here on this street and we are walking or driving very slowly. So true enough, no, Waze tag that street, no, as heavy traffic, no, even though there's no traffic actually to begin with. No? But uh, again, it's not a full machine learning data poisoning, but it's how I would easily relate it and uh, how data poisoning or telemetry manipulation would affect systems. No? So see, there's also conflict injection against other X apps with the near real-time intelligent controller. It's also exploitation of malicious app access, no, or control, no, to influence other apps and non-real-time, non and near real-time rigs. There's also on the user equipment, no, and network data sniffing, no, the presence of UE identifiers can lead to tracking, no. So like for your IMEI, no, if anyone could sniff IMEI over the radio network, no, it could lead to exposure of your location. No? But that said, no, that would mean the threat actor would have a lot of sensors in vicinity or a geographical area. No? But if they control the environment or they are in the network, no, they would be able to track, no, which cell site at least, no, you are logged in. So for security, no, in rigs and apps, no, you got platform level security, as mentioned then kanina a while ago. You want strong authentication with multi-factor. You want strong access control, no? Least privilege with role-based access control. Resource and app isolation so that in case anything goes wrong with them, they are self-contained. The chance of a threat actor breaking out of that isolation would be minimal. And again, you want to minimize dwell time and detect them with minimal damage as they are early on in the exploitation of the resource or the app. For software level security, we want the boot up no to be secure and validated. We want control no in open source usage no. We want software inventory process no. And this actually contains including no libraries and version of libraries that you are using. Not sure if you remember maybe 2 years back no where we have an issue with log4j that could cause code execution if you're using the vulnerable version of log4j. And that time, that was the latest version of log4j. Apparently, a lot of vendors, no, even big ones, no, did not realize that they were actually using an open source library that is vulnerable. No? And I think this was early December 2022, if I recall correctly. Um, there were a page no that is live that vendors software no and specific versions are being updated constantly no on which softwares and versions that is affected by the vulnerability because apparently they were using log4j. And you even have updates no even as far as a few weeks after the initial disclosure, because that's the only time that even big vendors no have notified the public that they were actually affected with the log4j vulnerability and you need to patch your system. So what that tells me is even big software developers no firm no, or vendors no, does not have proper software inventory process no? Because why would it take you almost a month no, to determine that you are affected with log4j? But if you have asset inventory in your software, no? So that basically just highlights that fact. You got strong patching process because if you have identified a vulnerability, no, and you don't have a strong patching process, then how would you be able to mitigate that? No? And most of the vulnerabilities in software is resolved by patching. There are other controls, of course, but for the most part, it is patching. And speaking of which, if you are running an Apple product, no, they have released a recent patch yesterday, no, iOS 17.5 and macOS 14.5 no, for the rest of us. So uh, we need to start updating that, and we have to apply it, of course, personally on our own devices first. We also need to protect software repositories from virus injection. So, again, going back to the SolarWinds incident, no, where a threat actor was able to inject their code in the repository of SolarWinds. Hence, when it was compiled, no, the backdoor was already included, and it was also signed. Hence, it was very hard to detect no, what happened for quite some time no, until Manjat was able to figure out that why is SolarWinds connecting to a domain that's not supposed to be contacted. No? Hence, then that's where the investigation process started. For system level security, you got strategies for service survival no? In case of ORAN service unavailability, got conflict resolution policies. Then for data level security, you have encryption at rest, and then strongly access controlled data buckets. Okay. Next, we have A1 interfaces. So just this up. Okay. Now for the A1, the scope would be policy management, yun, enrichment, information transfer. And then you got machine learning model management, and then REST APIs now for JSON and HTTPS. Take a look at the security control. It's just TLS because most likely it's going to be web request via APIs now, and then they would transfer all this information via web API request anyway. So TLS is a good enough protection against tampering and manipulation. And it protects against it protects confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And take a look at the risk. No? Still, concern is a denial of service. Sub risk would be leakage of sensitive info like subscriber location. No? And but here, no, the attack complexity is low to medium. So sophisticated attacks need a deep level of knowledge, no, for various use cases for them to be able to influence this. But it's still possible. Next, we have E2 interface. Um, okay. For this one, the scope would be near real-time RIC service control. You got near real-time RIC support functions and the E2 application protocol. No? And if you take a look at this, no, it's communicate. They need to encrypt communications in between modules. So IPsec is good enough, no, for them to protect against attacks against confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and prevent replay, no, for information stemming from the E2 interface. But again, taking a look at the risk, no, nandun pa rin yung denial of service, degradation for ORAN use case, leakage of information, and almost the same, no, as the A1 interface. Actually, the same. But the risk. For another interface, open protocol interface, you have the scope, no, for peer-to-peer LAN interface. It allows the split, no, between DU and RU for enhanced distribution and function of opening of RAN functions. Here is where you have communication sorry, between control plane, user plane, and since it's basically doing load balancing and session handling, no, synchronization would be a factor, and of course management. And with this, since it's P2P and LAN interface, no, related, authentication authorization are based on 8021X port-based network access control. So this is where when you plug an equipment on a network port, no, you will not be given automatic access to the network. You need to have a valid credential that would be sent to the radio server, validated with a backend, most likely LDAP service, no, if that credential you're presenting is valid. And if it is, no, that's the only time that the radios would command the switch to open up the port and allow you on the network. So that's 8021X. So no one would just be able to plug anything on the equipment, on the switch, no, and have raw access to your network infrastructure. So 8021X would prevent that type of physical attack. But well, you need to be physically there. No? So taking a look at the risk, no, denial of service still a major concern. No? But the attack complexity here is medium to high because, well, this layer is hidden. No? And you really need to have physical access to affect open protocol interface. Or at least you have a device that you control that is in attached to the open protocol interface. Now, for ORAN security enforcement. No? So, kanina halos nag-identify lang tayo. No? They want you to secure the environment, the ORAN environment with, well, proactive approach. No? So, one of those proactive approach is penetration testing. So, ideally, various vendors would have conducted penetration testing on their equipment before deploying it. No? Aside from interoperability, they have to be secure because if imagine, no, you're in a RAN environment, you're a vendor in a RAN environment, and a breach of that RAN environment was because you did not secure your module uh, appropriately. Do you think that you would last, no, with that kind of bad publicity in uh, the radio access network business? Of course, you won't. Diba? Kasi if, let's say, you deployed, let's say, in the Philippines, and maybe, let's say, Indonesia is replicating that deployment, but then suddenly when they check the vendors, you would see online that, oh, the a Philippine telco was breached because of this vendor's module that wasn't properly security tested. Na may vulnerabilities pala. So, of course, they would have second thoughts, or most likely not even second thoughts. They would outright reject that module and look for another vendor that has a better reputation in security for that. So they want proactive. So this one, penetration testing is the act of testing a security of the system, no? And figuring out what other vulnerabilities are present, no? And hopefully, of course, fix it before putting it into production. Security enforcement is they want us to detect. No? So log all key events in both OS and application level. and deploy knowledge-based analytics of attack for attack detection. No? Typically, you would want to send again this logs, no, on a central log aggregator or a SIM platform, and that's where you're gonna be doing your analytics. No, kasi now you have the entire logs of the RAN infrastructure in a single database. So it's going to be easy to correlate. No? Let's say at 1 a.m. there is an attack. No? Which other machine have a user that's logged in on them? No? So you would be able to easily see that on a SIM platform rather than going to each and every machine in your environment and checking which has someone that's logged in. And by that time, maybe it's too late. No? It's not a point in time reference anymore. The threat actor might have logged out and you cannot detect their presence if that's the only thing that you're going to be looking at. Okay? Now, protect is they want us to apply best practices to prevent intrusion, and we'll have some discussion on CIS and this here in a bit. Zero trust philosophy and proactive controls with firewall, WAF, and IPS. So for firewall, the best approach would be very granular rules. So it's not that you have a firewall, but you allow interVLAN routing without any controls. No, it's you have a firewall in between network segments, and you have to define which port and which host needs to communicate to which. No, there has been a lot of audit that I have been involved with that you could see no, that there was a firewall in between this network, but it's not actually blocking anything. It's just there for routing. And then you even see WAF on I've experienced this in a lot of government and banks, no, that they have WAF but it wasn't tuned. So suddenly they would ask a question on why were they breached, no, dun sa mga APIs nila and web applications if they have WAF. Only to find out if you check the WAF, it's default, no. They haven't tuned it properly to their environment, hence there are bypasses, no, that could be applied on those, no? And of course, intrusion prevention system to drop malicious traffic. So for ORAN, security focus group, they have test specs to validate and recommend, no, for robustness of standard security protocols, no, like SSH, TLS, TTLS, IPsec. No. You got recommended versions, Hypersuite, management ng certificate, passwords, again, robustness of password policies and complexities, no, wherein it must be resistant against brute force and authorized resets. So at least for brute force, no, password complexity would need to be at least for the policies, no, it has to be a good amount of characters, no, maybe 14 to 16 characters. And then when you store the password on a system, no, it must not be in plain text or in a weak hash form. So typically at this day and age, no, you would want maybe a SHA-512 or a bcrypt better, no, the storage of passwords, no, for validation, so that that's the thing with SHA-512 and bcrypt, no, it takes a lot of resource, no, to brute force it, making it very resistant against brute force, no? Assuming that you are not using generic passwords. They also want vulnerability scanning in the infrastructure level, application level, and even fuzzing. So for the scanning, I would think that they might have, not sure if they have updated it recently. It's not just a one-time scan. It should be constant scanning, scheduled scan. So they might want to change this recommendation to vulnerability management instead of scanning. Pag scanning kasi usually have the notion of it's a one-time off. For management, it's continuous process. No? Someone's gonna scan, someone's gonna validate it, and then they're gonna do and repeat the process again. No? Because well, there's new vulnerabilities being discovered every day. No? So you want your vulnerability scanner to be also have signature updates for these vulnerabilities to check and notify you. No? Maybe today we're not vulnerable, but maybe later this midnight, no, a vulnerability would surface, no, and we would be able to detect it immediately on the next scan. And we don't want the next scan to be next year. So we want the interval to be as small as possible so that our exposure would also be minimized. There's also protection against denial of service, no? Like protocol flooding at all stack layers, and many more areas are still being discussed. With that, no, the basic one they wanted is to use zero trust architecture And they have this saying, no, never trust but verify, always verify. This was coined noong 1994, no, with by Stephen Paul Marsh in his doctoral thesis in University of Stirling. So what it says is devices should not be trusted by default, even if they are connected to a permission network, such as a corporate LAN or in our case, Open RAN. No? Even if they were previously verified, you will not trust them. Okay? So the traditional approach of trusting device is not relevant in a complex environment of corporate network or in our case, Open RAN. So if you are in a RAN environment, then let's say you're a vendor, now you have a specific module there. Any API request or data that would be sent to you, even though you are assuming it's part of the local area network, no? All those fields and parameters would have to be validated individually so that you don't run the risk of a compromised device within the RAN network talking to you and then eventually compromising. So you don't want that. Hence, all systems should be self-contained, should be self-reliant, should be defensible, no, within the same module. Hence, they are advocating zero trust, which is good. No, it adds some overhead, yes, but you are now talking to multiple vendors in a single RAN environment, that which you didn't have that problem before. No, you don't want to be in a bind, no, where there was an issue, there was a breach, and now three of you vendors have to talk to each other and be honest on who was the cause of the breach if hindi malinaw kung saan nanggaling, no? You don't want that kind of discussion. You want it to be clear that the initial entry point came from vendor A and then eventually nakatalon to other system. But again, with that zero trust, you are trying to prevent or minimize that uh, scenario where a compromise from vendor A would lead to compromise to vendor B to vendor C and then eventually the full uh, Open RAN network. So ZTA's principles and definitions. No? This is defined by the National Cybersecurity Center and it identifies key principles. No? Again, you need to have a single strong source of user identity, which is the most likely the IAM system. You need to have user authentication with good password policies and multi-factor if appropriate. You need to have machine authentication. So even machines need to authenticate, no? In a zero trust environment. No? You also need to have additional context, no? Policies, compliance, and device health, no? And authorization policies to access an application, meaning you could be, this is a common misconception even in security. No? Authentication is different from authorization. Authentication is being able to validate a user or a machine on who they say they are based on the credentials that they presented. No? Authorization is basically what could they do? What are they authorized to do with that level of authentication? Because I've seen systems where a single user that was authenticated, if you manipulate the next request, no, they could see other users' data, which should not be the case. They were not supposed to be authorized to see that. But again, if you're putting your the mind of a threat actor, no? If as long as I could authenticate to the system, even the basic one, and I manipulate, let's say, get my details, no? But the my details user ID is manipulated to an admin, let's say, user ID. And if the system is not checking authorization properly, the system might give out the information of the admin and might eventually lead to previous escalation issue. So again, two different things ang authentication and authorization. So keep that in mind. Which goes hand in hand, no? Access control policies within the application to validate via authorization checks. No? What are you actually allowed to do? And any issues, no, or any anomalies or out of bounds checks, no, that why is this session attempting to access another uh, users or systems context na hindi naman siya authorized, no, it should raise an alarm. So that should be the case. No? So for this, I would refer the class to NIST SP 800-207, the Zero Trust Architecture. This is 59 pages. It's a good read. No? And most of my readings, even not for Open RAN, you could apply this in your own network infrastructure or systems. No? So there's a lot of good practices that you could learn from this documentation. Okay. Next, we have defense in depth. So what we want is to defend a system against any particular attack using several independent methods. No? Meaning, if let's say your firewall fails sa network perimeter, hopefully your host firewall should be able to catch that attack. And if that host firewall fails, no, and in which case a lot of organization turns off actually host firewall, no, which should not be the case. And if that host firewall fails, maybe the antivirus in your server would detect this malicious software, no, trying to execute something malicious in your environment. So that's a third level of defense. But in case they have a bypass against your antivirus signature, maybe you have a fourth level of defense where you are employing application whitelisting. So application whitelisting is you have a list of known application that is authorized to run in your environment. So if you have a malware that was able to bypass no, perimeter firewall, host firewall, antivirus, evaded the antivirus, maybe the fourth and last one, no, the application whitelisting would able to see that, okay, I do not know where you came from. You don't seem malicious because the antivirus did not alert, but you are not in the allowed list. So case mitigated. Again, that's the defensive depth. There were independent controls that would have to be bypassed, and ideally, no, it should be on the second or third. If the threat actor was in the second or third level, that's a bit of a concern. But unfortunately, a lot of organization thinks of security as just a firewall and antivirus, and that should not be the case. And do note, if the malware is already on the workstation or on the server being detected by the antivirus, that means a lot of your perimeter controls already failed. No? The You should not bank on the antivirus to be the last line of defense, but most organizations treat the AV as the first line of defense. Again, that's not the case. That's the last line of defense. That would mean there's a lot of controls na bypass na nung threat actor. So for defense in-depth controls, no, there are various components here. You got physical, no? Of course, cannot gain access to the building. You have fences, you have CCTVs for detections. You got armed guards, no? Even dogs, no? For secure environment. You got technical controls, no? Like firewalls, antivirus, EDRs, disencryption, authentication. That's a technical control. And stuff that cannot be covered by physical and technical, no? You have administrative controls, like organizations, policies, and procedures, and ensure no, that there is proper guidance available in regards to security and that regulations are met. And this should apply to everyone. Hindi pwedeng may exemption. No? That's gonna be an issue if, diba, you fired someone because nag-violate siya ng isang administrative policy, but the C-levels are doing that too. No? Tapos hindi nyo sinisita. No? That's gonna be an issue with DOLE. The policy should be applied to all. No? And then for principles of defense and that, no, you got uniform protection. Again, same level of protection across all networks, but you have protective enclaves, no? Segmented and um, you segment sensitive and critical segments deeper into the organization. And ultimately, no, you are information centric. Pagdating sa defense in depth, no, you are protecting the information or the data. That's the goal of the threat actors anyway. So you need to focus on how to protect the data and put them on a shell, no, and multiple layers on that. Also want to do threat vector analysis, no, and figure out, no, if I'm the threat actor, where would I go to get to the data, no, and start blocking all those steps. I mean, for the most part, you most likely won't be able to identify most of this entry points, no, or threat vector, but with defense in depth, no, get multiple controls and barriers, they should be able to trip at least one of those, no, and alert you that something weird is going on in the environment. So that would be a win, I would say. So for this one, there is recommended no practice for improving industrial control systems cybersecurity with defense in-depth strategies. No? This is a 58-page document, roughly around 3 hours read. No? And again, you can use this even in your IT infrastructure. Next, we have principle of least privilege. So this is a fundamental concept in computer security that states, no, users and process or systems, no, should only be given minimum permission and access that is required to complete your task. So let's say you are in a bank, you're a teller, no? Why would an IT admin give you a privilege to install software? You don't need to install software. It's the IT's job to install software. So you cannot give a user that is tagged as a teller, not that kind of privilege. You can even give the teller account, no, or teller role privilege to install printer. That's not within their job. No? Again, you want to minimize what they could do so that in case their account gets compromised, no, or they execute a malware that's not in the environment, no, you could contain the damage, no, and minimize it because what the malware could do is based on the privilege that was attached to that role, no, very minimal then, and hopefully you detect them because they are trying to uh, misuse the roles, no, that were provided to that user. So by limiting these rights, no, the attack surface and the likelihood of exploitation is severely reduced. No? If a user or process has more privilege than necessary, then you could cause misuse of those privilege, causing harm. No? And on the other hand, when users or process have only the permissions they need, the risk of unintentional damage or deliberate exploitation is reduced slash contained. So maybe relating this to your machines, no? Maybe a lot of us still, no, would be using an admin account to browse the internet, join the Zoom session, open up a Word document. No, I'd say that's a risky move. No, ideally you would have an admin account. Yes, if you own the computer, no, or in the organization, the IT would own the admin account, and they would create a regular account for you to do your day-to-day job. That's non-admin. So that's part of principle of least privilege. By for the most part, you don't need an admin account. You typically need an admin account to troubleshoot something, to install a software, or to reconfigure a hardware. No? So roughly, you don't need it for your day-to-day operations. No? So why would you use an admin account? And the problem is, if you think about this, you're using an admin account, you were sent a phishing message, and then you click on the link, and then you infect your computer. That malware already has and inherited, no, the privileges of the admin account. In that case, full system takeover. But if for some reason you are on a standard user, you got infected with a malicious link, diba? They would still need, no, to exploit the previous escalation vulnerability to fully take over the system. And hopefully, diba, the user realized the mistake or an antivirus detect that malicious stuff is going on the system, and it would be disconnected immediately from the network. Again, you're trying to minimize the dwell time of the threat actor. So sample implementation of principle of least privilege is regularly review, no, adjust user permissions and rights, no, according to their current job and responsibility. So we have here what we call role creep, wherein if let's say you're in a role A, no, and suddenly you were moved to a different job, no, but you still want to perform, no, with the transition task na you are performing on role A, now you have two roles, role A and role B with those permissions. No? When sometimes they would forget to revoke that thing, no, until you get to a new role na may role C. So now you have role A, B, and C in your account, no, that you aren't actually using. So that makes it a bit more dangerous, no. Hence, it has to be regularly reviewed, no, and you have the permission. Again, you also want role-based access control or attribute-based access control to manage this permissions, no, systematically and consistently. You want to avoid, of course, granting excessive permissions, especially for admin accounts, um, and implement, no, separation of duties to prevent users from having excessive controls over critical systems or data. And of course, you want to audit and monitor user activities to detect, address violations of the principle of this privilege. So maybe a basic thing that would help, no, most organization is maybe if you have an admin account, no, you have a central admin account that you don't really touch unless there's an emergency. But for the rest of the admins, you could maybe put a policy, no, where uh, if no one has logged in on that admin account or even regular account for that matter in a domain environment, so maybe 7 or maybe 30 days. you would automatically disable the account. That minimizes the number of active accounts in your environment. Because for some reason, maybe that user has maybe 3 months leave, no, and is abroad, and it's not they're actually supposed to be logging into the system. So even though you have a policy that would disable the account when they are out of the office for a long leave, no, in case someone forgets it, no, there is a something in the system that would automatically kick in. Now, oh, 7 days no login, I'm gonna disable the account. When the user comes back, no, they would just have to reactivate that account. So that minimizes the exposure of the system. So you could that's one examples of this. Next, we have the NIST cybersecurity framework. This one can help organizations begin with their cybersecurity program, and they're giving this framework for free. I think we're now on version 2. It was recently released. No, this was built of of practices that are known to be effective and can help organizations improve their security postures. And then we have 5 key functions. No? So identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So let's take a look at this. So, identify, this is we developed, no, an organizational understanding, no, to manage cybersecurity risk. So we need inventory ng mga systems, assets, data, and capabilities natin. So we also want to identify critical enterprise processes and assets, and we want to document information flows. Again, this is part of the identity. And we want to maintain hardware and software inventory because it's hard to protect something that you do not know exists in your environment. And we also want to establish policies for cybersecurity that includes roles and responsibilities. Because diba, the policy will not operate on its own. You need people to uh, check it out, enforce it, and then modify it as needed. And this would help us identify threats, vulnerabilities, and risks to the assets. So next, we want to protect. No? So once we have identified those items, we want to develop and implement appropriate safeguards to ensure delivery of service. No? We want to manage access to assets and information, no? Lock them down, give only users what they need, no? Based on our policies and procedures, and well, based on the order of business, of course. We want to protect sensitive data, no? And with sensitive data, we also want to assess, diba? Do we actually need all this data to operate, or could we actually minimize in data collection? So this has something to do now with privacy. No? So with the data privacy law, no, we are mandated to only collect data that is required for us to do our job. No? If it's over collection, that's going to be a violation of the Data Privacy Act. We want to conduct regular backups as part of the Protect. This in turn is part of mitigation against um, hardware failure or even ransomware attacks. No? So if you have been ransomware, they encrypt everything. You need to have backups that is hopefully offline and not encrypted to be able to restore your operations. Also want to protect your devices, manage your device vulnerabilities via patching, and then train users, no, on how to use the system and how to be security conscious. So this is part of the protect of NIST. Now, we have identified, we have protected, now we want to detect any anomalies. No? So here we want to implement appropriate activities to identify occurrence of security incident. So we want to test and update detection process. You could test and run some benign malware or flow, no, and determine that is it actually getting logged? Is it someone's actually detecting, no, and notifying this, no, for this test, no. And we want to know, of course, the expected data flow in our enterprise. And again, we want to maintain and monitor logs. You cannot just send all the logs to a SIM, no, and not maintain and monitor it. SIM, especially the commercial ones, no, they tend to be very expensive. So you want to weed out, no, what really is the only information we need for monitoring and visibility. And basically, what we want is low events per second, but high impact. That would be the best case scenario, but that's not always possible, of course. We also want to understand the impact of cybersecurity events in our environment, no? For us to be able to assess, no? What kind of severity rating, no? Once we detect something. Then if we do detect something, we want to respond, no? Develop, implement appropriate activities to take actions regarding a detected cybersecurity incident. Ensure response plans are tested. No? It cannot be just on paper and you would only test it pag may actual incident. That's dangerous. No? That plan might not work because some of those components might not be updated or not tested, and the person performing it wasn't trained to do that. So it has to be tested and um, cascaded, no, to everyone that's going to be involved in the response cycle. We have to update it. We have to coordinate it with internal and external stakeholders, and sometimes even regulatory, no? If we have to report for a privacy breach or a cybercrime. Then after that, now we have responded, we start to recover the systems, no? So develop and implement corporate activities, no? To maintain plans for resilience and restore any capabilities or services that were impaired, no, due to the incident. Communicate with the internal stakeholders on the status of the recovery, and ensure no recovery plans are updated. And we have to manage public relations and company reputation. For the most part, this is going to be a public event, especially if the threat actor is posting yung mga attacks nila against our environment. So NIST, there's a 51-page NIST cybersecurity framework. There's already a version 2, so I have to update this. Estimates around 5 hours, which is interesting, especially the version 2. It's already updated. Next framework is the CIS Critical Security Control. So this one, similar to NIST, no? It's a framework, but this one is made by non-profit entity. They help with the to help organizations, no, design guidelines and best practices for securing IT infrastructure. We are now on version 8. This used to be critical security controls, top 20 security controls. They have been able to collapse some of it into 18 controls na lang, to consolidate some. And they have identified, no, that if we are able to have a good implementation of these 18 controls, we would be better protected against nation states, financially motivated attackers, malwares, and even script kiddies. Don't put down script kiddies. They could be a cause of a problem, and a very big problem for them. And I wouldn't say those attacking government websites right now are script kiddies. I mean, you could see their sophistication attack. They might have started as script kiddies, but they are ramping up their game. No? There's a lot of government websites and even private websites, no, the organizations that has been targeted by these so-called local hacking groups. So for the CISC controls, again, they are the formerly top 20 critical security controls. Now they have on version 8, no, they are now from 20 to 18. And while we don't have time to discuss all of this 18, no, I could spend 3 to 5 days, no, discussing all of these 18, no, and their implementations. But take a look at yung number 1 and 2, no. It is a control to have an inventory and control of enterprise assets and software assets. Again, similar to this identify, no, it's hard to protect something that you are not aware it exists in your environment. So, what would you protect against malware? Number 10, if you don't know that you have a server that's very old that you cannot upgrade, nawala na pala antivirus, no, na nagso-support. So, you need to identify that. And the control there is raise it to management and state, no, that you need to kill that system that's end of life, no, and upgrade it to a new one, no, that's much more adapt with the times, no. But the only way to do that is if you have a good asset inventory of your hardware and software, no, even software libraries. Okay. And if you want to do audit, no, on your own, there is this audit scripts. I think I have some links here sa akin. So it's an Excel file that would give you a dashboard, no, an instruction on how to audit your organization against the CIS critical security controls, and they have the version 8 already, no. And let's see for number 1. You would have this checklist. It's a very basic checklist that would ask you, no, do you have this and do you have policies for that? Is there any controls? Is the control automated or technically enforced? Is the control reported to business? So You could validate that if you have something in place, if it's ad hoc or in progress. And what would happen is, as you answer this, no, you would have a specific grade per control, no, and you would have to do that across 18 controls, no, and ultimately on the at the end of it, no, you would have this dashboard view on which control you are weak at and which control you are good at. Then you could present this to management. You would have no a maturity level. No? So maybe at the initial assessment, you are at maturity level 1.2. No? And you could identify with the graphs now where you are weak, and given your limited resource, you could say now, okay, let's say I have a 10 million peso budget. If I put it on control 10, 14, and 18, which we are weak at, that needs very minimal resource, we could improve our security posture a lot more than putting all those 10 million, let's say, in control number 5, pero yun lang yung kaya mo isolve. No? So you could spread it out. And then after you implement that and put resources on those three controls, you could present to management yung improvement na this is us during the first assessment, this is us. Maybe we have a maturity level of 2.1, no, from 1.2 within 6 months. So that's an indicator that you are improving your maturity level, and you have a metric, no, that you could present to management on how you are improving based on the resources they are giving. But ultimately, we want a maturity level of 5. Well, that's very hard to do. That's the goal. No? And this is a good way to benchmark and have some KPIs, no, within your organizations if needed. So there is a document that you could download. You just have to register, no, from CIS. So version 8, this is 87 pages, roughly 5 hours, no, for you to understand yung details on implementation and details and implementation of the CIS 18 critical security controls. Okay. And not only for CIS critical security controls, no, CIS also has benchmarks. And this is what we want to implement on various systems. Like if you want to lock down, no, and secure an Ubuntu server, you could go to CIS benchmark and then you could download the documentation on what are their recommended practice on how to secure an Ubuntu server. It's not only that, no? Even enterprise Linux, Windows, Macs, Cisco routers and switches, Palo Alto, firewall, they have various components and hardware and systems, no? And you could implement. Even Apache, Nginx, a lot, no? Just check it out. There's a lot of benchmarks that you could read, no? And here's an example of Ubuntu CIS benchmarks on 4.1.11, no? How to ensure privileged account commands is collected and automated. So anything na gagawin ng admin or root, it would get logged, and if you have a syslog, it would be sent to your SIM. So you cannot, the admin cannot deny that it typed RM file something because it was logged, siya yung nakalagin at that time, and it was recorded to the SIM. So you have tracking on what's happening on the system. So this is how they would do that. And even the commands, no, on specific user Ubuntu version, it was given to you. And there are scripts na you could tweak, no, para i-apply yung benchmark based on what you need. You don't even have to type each and every one of these. Kasi I think the Ubuntu one's around 200 plus pages na. That's just Ubuntu. That's a lot more. So for this, at least for my class, now we have this um, last exercise where they would be installing an Ubuntu. I want the older Ubuntu, no, so that would have some vulnerabilities, no, which is good. And then implement most recommendations in Ubuntu CIS benchmark. So you'll have the documentation for Ubuntu open, and then you'll start implementing yung lockdown of the Ubuntu system. And then you would now use a vulnerability scanner, no, after that. You have a VM that is not locked down, and then the VM that's locked down. And then you would see in the vulnerability scanner, no, what kind of issues would the lockdown not exist, no, as compared to a freshly installed Ubuntu version. So you could see ano yung difference nila, and why is a lockdown version a lot better, because diba, you have less exposure, any action is recorded, diba, hindi ka manghuhula on whatever happened on that machine. Again, yeah, but this is a lengthy exercise. Okay.